Pacquiao was an old man fighting a younger man. Pacquiao probably should have been out of boxing the past 5 years, maybe even 6 years ago. Yo, this is Trav with Trav Sports Bag. I'm back at it with you again today. As you can see, Bias is along. And you know when Bias is here, it's going down. Boxing's going to be spoken about today. But before we get to that, take care of that YouTube deal. That means subscribe to the channel. And when you subscribe to this channel, make sure you hit the alarm bell. When you hit that alarm bell, it makes sure that you get every drop we drop as we drop it. In addition to that, if you don't know, now you do. I'm looking for my first 1,000 subscribers. That's right, 1,000 subscribers. I want a large sporting community. Even though we're talking boxing today, this is a sports channel. So we're going to talk basketball. We're going to talk boxing, baseball, all of the sports that you're interested in. So make sure you join the fray and join us with that. So with that being said, Bias is here. And of course, there's a big fight this Saturday for the WBA, WBC, and the IBF title. Yordenis Ugas versus Errol Spence. The truth, Errol Spence, coming out of Dallas, Texas via New York City or Long Island. Either way, on his Cuban opponent. And by the way, we'll talk a little bit about how Cuba's now going to be part of professional boxing, but we're going to talk about this fight first. What do you see in this fight that we need to know, Bias?
Well, I'm looking forward to this fight. I want to see how Errol looks. You know, he had the car accident. He had the issue with the eye. You know, he's kind of on the comeback trail. You know, he had to rehabilitate his body. And so maybe last fight he wasn't at his best. So I'm looking to see if he's going to be a little bit sharper. I'm not going to say Ugas doesn't have a chance. I just don't think he's going to win. But he does like to throw body punches. And if he's able to throw body punches, I want to see how Errol responds to that.
Exactly, because I don't think anyone's really gotten to Errol Spence's body throughout his entire career. In fact, I think a little bit, it did happen in the beginning when he took on Kell Brook out there in England, but he was able to overcome, became champion of the world because of it. But you mentioned how Errol has been through a lot lately, especially with this car accident. And he just put us on to another accident he has had just recently in which his insurance company dropped him. He's still living dangerously. I'm hoping that he has his head on right. And I don't like built-in excuses. And I don't want to call it an excuse if he were to lose based on his eye with the retina or based on any of these accidents. I like to see an official win. And I think Ugas, with the experience as an amateur and now being revitalized as a pro, I think he posed somewhat of a problem, a stylistic problem.
Yeah, I can see that. You know, like I mentioned, he likes to go to the body. You know, he may not be the quickest, but he takes a decent shot and he's not going to go anywhere. And I think it would show a lot on Errol if he's able to take him out. I don't expect a knockout. You know, I think Ugas is durable. We've seen him take good shots, you know, big punches, and he doesn't go anywhere. But you never know.
Yeah, of course. Boxing is the never know, the theater of the unexpected. And I don't think anyone's really expecting Errol Spence to knock him out, but I believe they do expect him to be thorough. They want him to be dominant. They want him to show that he is the best welterweight in the division the way he says he is. So we're going to find out because Ugas, as you said, he's a steady fighter. He's a very good fighter. He's very much down with the fundamentals, which you find a lot of in all of these Cuban fighters from the amateur days coming into the pros. But as far as Ugas goes, he fought Sean Porter, so he hasn't fought a light schedule of fighters. He fought Sean Porter and arguably beat Sean Porter. However, this is boxing, and politics has something to do with boxing. It was taken away from him, according to many.
Yeah, that was a close fight. If it had been given to Ugas, I wouldn't have been surprised, and I don't think any Sean Porter supporters could have been saying he was robbed. You know, it was a close fight, and I think most people, like you mentioned, probably think Ugas deserved the decision. He just didn't get it.
Yeah, and I tell you what, man, boxing fans, as we already know, they can be the most delusional. So I don't agree with his fans would have said, oh man, we're good with the loss if they gave it to Ugas. I think they'd have been doing what boxing fans do. They'd have been saying, oh man, he was robbed. There's just no way. It wasn't even close. How did they do that? Because those same people were saying how the fight with Spence and Bud was not that great. They thought that Bud wasn't really dominating him in the later rounds, which he was. Now,
Porter.
Porter. When Porter meant. Well,
right.
When Sean Porter fought earlier against Bud, they were fighting one another, and it was, and Porter did have the upper hand. But that's part of Bud's fight game here just as time goes on. And we saw the domination start to come, and it ultimately came. And you still have people claiming, oh man, his father should have never stopped it. I don't know why they did. But that's just boxing fans and a sign I had to let you all know.
When I said his fans, I should have said his objective fans.
Both of them? For real. Come on now. You're never going to have a consensus in boxing.
There's some out there. Come on, they're not all delusional.
Yeah, they probably aren't. But you know what? Let's go to his fight against Pacquiao. Pacquiao, a living legend, but let's not get it twisted. Pacquiao was an old man fighting a younger man. Pacquiao probably should have been out of boxing the past 5 years, maybe even 6 years ago. But because he beat Keith Thurman, he was given more credibility than he should have at this age. And people still kind of reminisce of how he used to be instead of what he was then. So is that still a huge win for Ugas, or is that just a matter of time that just ran out for Pacquiao?
I would say, you consider yourself knowledgeable when it comes to boxing. And same for me, I consider myself knowledgeable. I would not call it a huge win. If it was 6-7 years ago, does Ugas win that fight? You have to take that into account.
Yeah,
he was definitely on the back nine, if not the 18th hole.
Yeah, right. With a putt ready to go.
Right, and if you watch that fight, you can see Manny, you can see him thinking, but his body did not respond the way he was used to it responding. He couldn't avoid the right hands. And since when was Manny a sucker for consistent right hands? It wasn't the Manny that we're used to.
Yeah,
so I can't call it a huge victory.
No, it wasn't a huge victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. So now Ugas is the champion, and he's going to be taking on Errol Spence. And as far as Errol Spence goes, in terms of the fights that he's had, we looked at when he had fought Sean Porter. And of course, the big fight, I don't want to get off the main topic here of his big fight with Ugas coming up on Saturday, but we want to talk about, for a point of reference, the type of fight he had against Sean Porter and the type of fight Bud had against Sean Porter. You always have different angles in boxing, depending on what your agenda is, depending on what your allegiance is. You'll say, well, Porter was old by the time he got to Bud, and it was the reason why he was even older is because of what Errol Spence had done. What are you expecting from Errol Spence against a fighter, a Cuban, well-talented, well-schooled boxer like Ugas? Exactly what would be the game plan if you were in his corner?
I would have him just sticking to the jab early. Stick that jab in his face. Jab to the body, not taking a lot of chances, and just gauging what Ugas has. And then after a couple rounds, if he can open up, I'd have him start throwing the harder punches, little more combinations. I think if Spence gets a knockout, that would be something big for him. After the fight, he's gonna say he's the best welterweight in the world anyway. But if he wins impressively, he's gonna have some ammunition to back up his talk.
Yeah, of course, because he does have a pretty decent resume, and especially when you do the comparison and contrast to Bud. And I do mention Bud, and I don't mean to mention Bud so much during the broadcast about Ugas, who deserves.
That's the fight we want, though.
Exactly. Those two are always going to be attached together, period, until they fight one another. But in terms of Ugas, you look at the backstory of Ugas. He tried to get away from Cuba on a number of occasions. He was put into jail because he was caught on every occasion.
Right.
And now he has his freedom.
Crazy.
And it's a hell of a story. And if you just love boxing or love people or love a good story, he's as good a story as you're going to get, which boxing does provide. we get very good stories coming from boxers almost all of the time, especially the ones who finally get to the top. And that takes me to, you have Cuba now, after all of these years, I believe 62 years, they're going to allow their amateur boxers to become professional boxers. The most dominant boxing program in recent memory is now going to feed the professional ranks without having to worry about defecting and without having to worry about just being amateurs. What are your thoughts on that?
That's huge. That's huge. You know, going back in the day, Teofilo Stevenson never got to fight professionally. Felix Savon never got to fight professionally. And you have people out there who say, Stevenson would have beat Muhammad Ali. Stevenson would have done this.
Yeah.
Yeah, with 0 professional fights, I doubt it. But had he been allowed to be professional, who knows what would have happened. So I think it's going to be huge for boxing. That Cuban boxing program is legitimate. You know, they've produced so many great boxers over the years. And now they're going to have the freedom to become professional. I think we're just going to see more great Cuban fighters come through the pipeline.
See, I just happen to be on the other side of the argument in terms of they're going to have a very good Cuban boxing professional career for a lot of these amateurs that are coming through. Because the reason why, in my opinion, for the most part, not that they did not have a dominant program, it's just that you had so many of these fighters who had to stay in the amateur ranks. And so when you had these younger fighters from all over the country, all over the world, especially from the United States, who were 19 years old, they're fighting 32-year-old amateurs who had 400 and 500 fights. That experience accounts for something. And that's why I think they continued their dominance. And then not to mention, look at these Cubans that have come over to the United States. I think they were very good fighters. A lot of them became very good fighters. Some of them not really that good. I mean, what was it? Jorge Luis Gonzalez, the heavyweight? Yeah, I'm not going to compare him to Savon or Teofilo Stevenson, but he was one of the Cuban heavyweights that won gold medals and had done well with their program, and he wasn't much of anything as a heavyweight here in the United States. And now that it will be on more of an even keel this time with these fighters coming from Cuba, I don't think they're going to have that huge advantage of having all of this amateur experience to be as dominant from the 19-year-old, 20-year-old, and 23-year-olds. Now, I heard there is a Cuban out there who has won 2 gold medals at 24 years old, you know, for Cuba, and that's probably more the exception than the rule, because a lot of their fighters, you know, they won their multiple gold medals because they fought for so long as amateurs. Turning pro is a different game. As you saw with perhaps the greatest amateur of all time, you know, Vasily Lomachenko, as great as he was as an amateur, even though they gave him the right fights and he had his chance to fight for a championship and he won, we saw the problems he had against Salido.
Right.
And the transition from an amateur fighter to a professional fighter, a lot more physical.
True. And you know, those Cuban fighters turning professional, they're gonna have to hook up with the right people, right trainers. And it's gonna take them a while, I'm sure, but eventually they're gonna have a program where they're developing pro fighters. You know, their amateur status is outstanding. So I'm pretty sure that eventually they're going to develop a good professional program as well.
Yeah, the whole country might be like the Kronk, you know, Kronk Cuba. So they're just going to go out and beat up on everybody. So hopefully their professional program can do the same thing. You know, we do have some good Cuban fighters now. I don't think great, very, you know, because people throw great around so loosely now. I think we have very good fighters like Rigondeaux. He's a very good fighter. Joel Casamoya was a very good fighter, not great. And I guess they might have been great if they would have started professionally earlier with the amateur background they had, and they had a little bit more time to do what they were doing. Because, I mean, an argument can be made based on the birth certificates probably not being just up to par. There could be some argument to be said that these guys were already in their prime or past their prime when they had their first fight.
True. And you mentioned Rigondeaux. I didn't like Rigondeaux, but what he did to Nonito Donaire, oh my gosh, that was a masterful performance that night. He probably just went up too far.
Exactly. Well, we knew the circumstances behind the Lomachenko fight, but you know what? Loma was on another level regardless of any weight class he fought in, especially at that weight class. He was phenomenal. He was difficult to hit. He knows the angles. He's just a herky-jerky, quirky fighter. and we see why he had the success he had as an amateur and transitioned over to the pros, doing a lot of the same thing against the top fighters. Not even a big puncher, but he still made fighters quit. Have you seen Axeman lately? Seriously, come on now.
I asked that on the group we're in on Facebook. What happened to the Axeman after he got Loman? Oh, what was the nickname they came up? Loman Quiddo or something?
I don't know what they gave him. I know he didn't come out, and I had some big green for him.
I can't even remember. It was something no mouse or something like that. I can't remember. But
whatever it is, it fits.
That's what he did to Nicholas Walters.
Exactly, and you know, it's a sad situation for him, but it just shows you once again.
That's what it was. No Moschenko.
No Moschenko. Well, you know what? That's what happened. That's exactly what happened. No Moschenko. He could not take any more of it, and he showed it. But Lomachenko, a special fighter, future Hall of Famer, no question to be asked. There are so many other great fights out there. We'll talk about that eventually anyways. But before we leave, what's your prediction for this fight between Ugas and Spence?
I got to go Spence by unanimous decision.
You know what? Unanimous decision. I'll tell you what, I think Ugas fights really well. And these Cuban fighters fight with a little bit more pride. I don't know why. I'm not going to down Spence and say he does not have pride. But these Cuban fighters have some pride. They have this inner ability to just sustain what they're doing. And they just fight because I guess I think it's more of a character trait based on, especially him, going back and forth to jail based on trying to get the hell out of his own country. I'm going to go with Spence as well, and probably a majority of the decision. I think Spence wins regardless because we still have to be on track for the Bud Crawford fight versus Spence. I don't want to take anything away from Ugas, but that's how I see it right now.
I do have to mention, I've watched All Access. I listened to Errol Spence on the Jim Rome show earlier today, and there's just something about how he sounds and how he's talking I don't really like. He doesn't sound like a guy who's ready to go in there and battle. He said he's having fun, he's happy to be back in the ring, but just his energy, there's something that seems off to me. So if he happens to lose, I wouldn't be surprised. I just don't expect it.
You know what? He has this laid-back attitude anyways. I think it's something he inherited from being in Texas, the slower kind of guy. And he says everything. He's so deliberate in what he's saying. He doesn't speak fast at all. He seems like he doesn't have any charisma. I don't know if you can really identify the charisma that he needs to have, but he doesn't seem to have that. But when he gets in the ring, we're enthused by what we're seeing. He's not a boring fighter when he's in the ring. Being a southpaw, being a power puncher, and he's willing to mix it up. I mean, you know, that's why he has the fans. I don't think he's getting the fans the way Floyd Mayweather had gotten the fans, by saying things and trying to really provoke the crowd. You know, Floyd could have done just the same by just being as spectacular as he was offensively and defensively. I think right now, Spence is that guy. I think he's the quiet guy, but still goes out there and lets his fighting speak for him. That's just how he is, the family guy, quiet guy, the guy who drives and gets hit by cars and hits cars. That's what he does. So on that note, I'll let you all know that you can check out some of these other sports that I have on here, because as I said in the beginning, this isn't just a boxing channel. There are sports, but you can rely on us for boxing, whether it's this big fight coming up on Saturday or if it's another fight of any kind. We'll be bringing it to you. So when you see Bias, watch out. We're going to get a knockout coming on. So for Bias, I'm Trav with Yo Trav Sports Bag. Until next time.